Testing, 1, 2, 3. So good morning. My name is Doug Chase with RES Software. I'm the sales guy based out of the Midwest. And so I just want to make sure that you stop and visit our booth. We are the guys with the flying monkeys. So please take that into consideration when you are filling out your forms. So the topic today, right? And we also have Mark Nafe, who's my senior solution architect, also based out of the Chicago area. And our topic today is going to be talking about IT as a service, and which is probably one of the most, nebulous concepts since cloud-based computing, whatever that means. And so from IT as a service, just out of curiosity, how many people actually have a specific project around trying to enable what they think is IT as a service? Okay, how many people actually know what IT as a service is, or why they want to do it? Kind of, sort of.
So it's an information gathering session.
Yeah, this is an information gathering session, so that's not bad news. So IT as a service, why even do it?
One more.
Good. IT organizations today are currently a cost center. They cost the organization money, so that when you go to your CIO or your director or whoever owns the budget for IT, you have to ask for money that they consider an operating expense. So all the help desk, all the VDI that you're doing, all the Citrix, all the VMware, all the Oracle databases, all the business continuity, disaster recovery, that's all a cost to the organization, and it's an expensive cost. And IT has been trying to figure out a way to become more efficient to either deliver more value to the organization or spend less money. So we talk about spending less money. A lot of people go in the Citrix route, or they go in the virtualization route to be able to save on desktop, on enabling desktops. So let's virtualize the applications, let's virtualize the operating system. We could put them down to any dumb PC, and we're saving a bunch of money. That kind of happened, wasn't bad. But we're also seeing a lot of projects out there that had the promise of a very large return on investment and a lot of total cost of ownership, because savvy salespeople did some fancy spreadsheets, came up with a bunch of numbers, and said you're going to save X amount of money over X amount of time, and life is going to be great. Please give us $1 million. A lot of that didn't happen. So when we talk about why IT is a service, is that we're talking about a transformation from IT being a cost center into, in fact, a business center. We want to be in a position to be able to deliver services to an end user community that adds value to the level that you can actually potentially charge back for those services. And that value has to be pretty big for you to be able to do that. But now what we're seeing is with the bring your own device initiatives, we're seeing a bunch of hybrid environments where you have a cross mix of VDI, you have a cross mix of virtualization. You still have desktops out there running, fat client applications. There's a complicated environment out there. There's a complicated infrastructure, and there's a complicated end user infrastructure to support. So when we talk about what is IT as a service, right? What does that actually mean? Are we talking about cloud-based computing? Are we talking about the end users being able to do some self-service type of activities, such as, maybe easing help desk tickets by allowing end users to do password resets, to allow them to be able to do application requests, to streamline the infrastructure to the degree that end users can start doing some of their own support. A service catalog, right? What do we actually want to deliver to the end users? We want to deliver more than applications. We're pretty sure about that. Having an application store, and a lot of people that do IT as a service or promote this use the term, think of a Apple iStore or iTunes for the enterprise. Well, there's a little bit bigger story than that, obviously. Do we want to charge back? So if we're migrating from being a cost center into a business profit center, which is really what we're talking about with IT as a service, do we want to be able to charge back for those services? Are we delivering the type of value for a lot of large organizations where IT is very centralized and you have a lot of different business units? It might make sense. Or do you want to be able to outsource this? Do you want to be able to have people basically run the IT scenario for you, or at least portions of it, to take the heat off of the infrastructure that usually runs pretty lean within your own organization? I'm not going to read this because it's pretty wordy, but at the end of the day, we're talking about a user-centric, service-oriented approach to allow IT to become a profit center, or at the very least, not a cost center. Anything to add?
No, you did great.
So we talk about trying to provide a roadmap for this. There's a lot of confusion around this because, the first thing we have to do is figure out, right, what are you actually delivering today? Think about what type of services you perceive as delivering to the end user. If you are enabling an end user to be able to access their applications from any device, from any location, anywhere, that's a service. If to some degree you're allowing end users to be able to, say, do their own self-service password resets, that's a service. You have to figure out what you're doing today, not in the terms of IT as a service, but just what you're doing today that delivers value to the end user. Right? So now we have to take control of the user experience. And what does that mean? A lot of organizations have end user communities that are out of control. They are running around with devices that you don't support. They're requesting device support for things that you're not sure you want to be supporting. A lot of this can come from the executive level, where he gets, where the individual, he or she gets a, kind of a new toy, gadget, because IT executives are significantly more savvy today, frankly, than they were 20 years ago. They are technicians, and they want their IT department to be able to enable a lot of these type of things. So in that case, and when you talk about the user experience, that's everything the user gets access to. And from our perspective, we tend to look at things in terms of what services are you delivering, what's the context you're delivering it in, and how do we make it secure. So how do we enable this, right? From our perspective, we want to automate as much as humanly possible. There is a lot of IT functions that are happening today that are extraordinarily manual. There's some automation in there, but what we're really talking about is we're talking about workflow. When a user requests an application and they do it from an iPad or they do it from an iPhone, what process is behind that to make that happen? When a user wants to reset his own password because you gave him the ability to do that, what type of approval processes are behind the scenes to allow them to do that? If you want to onboard or offboard a new employee, another word for it is provision to deprovision. What has to happen there? When you click that button, managers get notified, HR gets notified, applications come in and out. It's very time consuming, and frankly, it's a hassle. So we want to automate as much as possible redundant tasks. Because these are all tasks. Everything that happens to enable an end goal is a task. And most of those tasks are repeatable, and most of those tasks can be automated.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we want to bring back from this is you guys have a lot of stuff in-house that you've been building out for a number of years. You probably have 10 years, 15 years worth of things that you guys have done. And what we're trying to do is kind of say, okay, we've done that, but now users are bringing their own stuff. They're getting these services from other locations. Maybe they have a Gmail account. Maybe they have a Hotmail account. Maybe they're getting services from Dropbox. So there are services that you have internally within your IT organization, but there's services that they're getting from somewhere else. How do you compete with those services that they're getting from somewhere else? And how do you do it on their platforms? How do you do it on an iPad? How do you do it on a Droid phone? How are you going to compete with those services so that you're still getting security around your offerings and you're still getting the automated flow and tasks that users are used to? When they go to the App Store on iPad, they click on a button, they have an app. Can you do that? No, typically you guys have to go through a process where you're going to deliver that app. There has to be workflow, there has to be change control, there has to be approvals, all that kind of thing. They can't just click on a button and get whatever they need. They need to go through the right process. So part of this whole organization is saying, how are we going to bring our levels up to the equivalent of a consumer IT device, whether it's an iPad or some kind of app store application?
Right, so we look at cataloging. So cataloging is actually automating the business workflow. So I mentioned it already. Everything behind providing a service to an end user community involves a lot of tasks. Right? Let's take a look at what the business workflow is going to be. If I'm in HR, or I'm in IT, more specifically, and we have a new employee that comes in, and that employee just happens to be in finance. There's a number of steps that have to be taken to make sure that that employee gets what he needs to be productive, such as getting access, of course, all the passwords into the main systems. Perhaps he needs to have specific financial applications drop down to whatever device he happens to be using, maybe a desktop, maybe it's a thin client, maybe you're deploying it through Citrix, however. Maybe that has to go through an approval process where the CFO has to approve that process. Right? So that's all workflow. Those are all steps that have to be taken, that have to be identified before we can start thinking about, actually providing some of these things as a service. And these are, all within what we call a service catalog, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. And finally, the chargeback. It's a little bit of a sensitive topic, because it changes the way that, that the organization looks at IT. So IT is a necessity, obviously, but does it really have to be an extreme cost center to the organization? As people in IT yourselves, do you not feel that you're providing a tremendous value to your organization that if you didn't, it wouldn't even be able to survive? How do we start thinking more of IT as a business? Charging back is one of those options. If you provide enough service to people who are using it on an ongoing basis, and it provides enough value to the organization where you can prove that what you're doing actually has some competitive advantage because of your efficiency, because of the streamlinedness of your infrastructure, because you reduced help calls by 50% by letting end users do things such as, once again, password resets even. I've heard from another organization that password resets represent about 50% of all help desk calls. It's crazy. It's a lot of money.
One other thing I want to mention about chargeback is that you are competing. We are competing with other services that are out there, third parties and everything else. It's easy to outsource something like a secure file share and send it off to Dropbox or whoever else. So we need to justify our costs within the organization and say our costs are competitive with or cheaper than us going to some third-party provider, Amazon Web Services or whoever, who's going to provide that service for us.
It's a great point. Mm-hmm. Yes?
Isn't there a common buying center? Because in terms of charges, users are now willing to pay a certain amount of money to have an application that is on, say, keyboard on an iPad.
Mm-hmm.
So in terms of charging, you're not necessarily always charging the corporation. The users actually are taking the cost on their own. So that bias the decision.
True. So there's kind of two levels of chargeback. I don't know if everybody heard her question, but basically if a user goes to the iPad and they spend their own money to go and buy some application or whatever, what does the organization care about that? Well, there's kind of two ways that works. One is you have the informal where users are going to go buy whatever they want. And usually IT is like, okay, you want to buy your own iPad? No problem. We don't care. Now they want to set up the Outlook connector and they want to have Outlook email on that iPad. Fine, no problem. It doesn't really cost us anything. We're good there. What happens when they want to start accessing Dropbox files from work? Okay, so they download the Dropbox app, they put it on the iPad, that's fine as well. What happens when the IT director says, we need to put security in, we need to buy a business solution for that? That's when you run into problems. Because sooner or later, the consumerization of IT, that consumer buying that thing on the IT device is going to morph into a corporate purchase and a formalized system around that application, around that usage pattern. And what we have to do is basically say, either we're going to bring that in-house and we're going to manage it in-house, or we're going to outsource it to a third-party company and they're going to manage that themselves. And that's where your cost is going to be comparable, where you have to decide, are we going to be less expensive or are they going to be less expensive? Okay, does that answer your question?
Thank you. It's a good question. So, how is the service built up, right? So we have to look at the business requirements and the workflow of all this. So this is us, from an IT perspective, it's getting out of, I guess, a little bit of the minutia, right, of I always use the term like playing whack-a-mole, right? IT tends, a lot of times tend to be a very reactive organization. The infrastructures that were set up 5-10 years ago are not built necessarily to handle immediately a bring your own device initiative. It happened, it's a revolution, whatever you want to call it, IT's got to deal with it. We also have to take a look at the business requirements for very, common services, right? At an if we talk about a healthcare goal, like a healthcare organization, one of the top line goals is how can we improve patient care, right? Or if you're not a healthcare organization, how can we improve profit? How can we become more streamlined? How does IT align itself with the business values and the business goals of their organization? Because a lot of times, people get so caught up in the weeds, of the day-to-day activities and tasks and things like that, sometimes the big picture is missing. And from an IT as a service perspective, this is us trying to bring IT into alignment, with the bigger picture of the organization. So obviously there's a technical process behind it. So there's a technical process behind everything. We want it to be transparent to the end user. But at the end of the day, what are the gears, to make this clock tick? When we take a look at the business and the work, the business requirements and the workflow of this, what are the technical aspects behind it? What type of things, if we do want to start automating certain things, what systems are we going to touch? What actually do we want automated? And finally, the end user experience. If you don't provide a positive end user experience, then at the end of the day, nothing ends up happening. There's increased calls to help desk. There are service level agreements that a lot of CIOs are responsible for, and usually it's in the high 90s, if not 100%, in terms of the delivery mechanisms that they're delivering to the end users. So being able to provide a positive end user experience, such as, is there an easy way for me to get access to the stuff I need to do my job through the device of my choosing?
There's just a couple of little quick points I want to make on that as well. We all use IT stuff, we all use iPads and everything else. So you have to look at this simplicity of the easiest way for a user to do something on an iPad, and that has to be comparable with anything that we're doing internally within the company. So if we're setting up Exchange or something like that and we have a long, laborious process, a user can opt out of that system sometimes. So we have to be careful about what our steps are and being able to portray an easier system for a user to be able to get to that system. So that opt-out factor can be a big issue for a lot of people.
Yep, absolutely. So we look at service discovery, right? So what services are in use today? So think about every service that you feel you provide to the organization from an IT perspective, and then figure out how to stream it, right? So what are you doing today? We're not only talking about a service-centric approach, but we're also talking about a user-centric approach. There's a lot of technologies out there that have been purchased to allow the end users to be able to get access securely to the information that they do their job, right? We need to find out what they're using. We need to find out to some degree how they're using it. And we need to make determinations about what we're going to be giving them in the future, right? What type of proactive things can IT do from an enablement perspective to allow end users to be able to get access and be productive as quickly as possible? How many of your end users today do you think are storing corporate information into Dropbox. How many don't know? That's a discovery process, right? We want to be able to poll the end user community in some way, shape, or form to be able to figure out what they're doing, how they're doing it. We know why they're doing it, right? They will to Mark's point, they will bypass IT and do their own thing if they think it's a better way to do it. And that becomes a very slippery slope. Consumers today, business consumers, are smart. They're using devices that they feel better than the ones are given to them from the organization. And they're being very creative about how they solve their own problems in terms of getting IT as a service. And the problem is, of course, is that it's extraordinarily unsecure. It's not secure. So the prospect of having healthcare records in a Dropbox is scary. The concept of having financial records in Dropbox is scary. The concept of having anything that matters to the corporation and anything that's not supported by the organization is scary, right? We need to take a look at, so when we talk about discovery, we really need to find out what's going on out there, frankly, before you can determine what type of services you want to be able to provide. We don't want to focus on the applications, just on the applications. Applications is a part of it. So yes, it would be great if Jane or John wanted to have access to Firefox, and you provided them a secure means to be able to do that, rather than just going onto a browser, downloading Firefox. And now you have yet another unsupported application that you have to somehow figure out how to manage or not manage in your environment. Applications are important. Being able to give the end users access to applications is important, but you need to do it on your terms, and it's only just a part of the piece. We include self-awareness in your discovery tool, or service awareness, I'm sorry. Once again, we want to find out what services are end users using today. What are they doing essentially what we're really trying to find out, frankly, is that what are they doing to bypass IT to satisfy their own needs to be more productive. And there is data out there where you can do that. You can use discovery to minimize the impact of change. Change events are very scary for end users. RES in particular is in the business of trying to keep a persistent, or at least part of what we do, is trying to keep a persistent experience from one operating system to another. The XP to Windows 7 migration is happening, whether anybody likes it or not. A lot of people are very well prepared for it, and some people are very unprepared for it. But the general consensus is that the users, more or less, are going to be unprepared for it. What they see today is not necessarily what they'll be seeing tomorrow. And that increases a lot of calls to help desk. They like to see their kitty cat and their kids, like everyone else does, on their screensaver. Right? We had to figure out a way to be able to offer these services without impacting the end user.
So when setting this up, the discovery component, there's kind of a few different things we want to look at. One, everybody has a tool to kind of find out what applications are out there. You may have a tool that's formalized and it says, okay, these are the ones we installed, that's what's out there. It's always nice to have a tool to find out what applications that users have installed that you may not have planned for, right? It's always nice to know how people are connecting to my infrastructure. Are they using iPads? What are they using? What devices are they using to actually connect to that information? The other part of the discovery is always the business workflow and finding out how exactly I'm going to deliver that service so that it's automated so I'm not interrupting that business workflow or so that I'm enhancing it as opposed to causing more layers of red tape for someone to do something. So that's always an important consideration as well. And the last part is when we're doing discovery, we want to think about the help desk. The users are always going to be calling the help desk. It's your first line of looking for things that we need to be more efficient on. Let's look at our help desk, let's look at our tickets and say, okay, users are calling us about XYZ, they want XYZ. This is something that we should look for automation to streamline that process so it's easier for the users.
Right. So now the delivery mechanism, right? So the user experience is key. Because once again, if the user doesn't adopt it and it's not being used, then it kind of misses the entire point of being able to provide these services to the end user. So there has to be an easy way. Once again, we take a look at it in terms of what services are you delivering, and in this particular case, we're looking very hard at the context of the end user. Who is he? What's he using? What device is he using? Where is he or she? What time of day are they accessing this information? Right? We want to let the end user be as productive as possible, but we want it to be secure. And that really is, frankly, the push and pull between IT and the end user community, is being able to provide what they need to do their jobs, but make sure it's done in a secure fashion. But the end user has to have a very intuitive, I would say, a process to get access to these services. So we take away the way you deliver services to the end user today. So, once again, we have to, what services are going to directly impact the end user experience? Once again, we talk about things in context. Users access different information with different devices in different ways. But at the end of the day, the experience should remain consistent across device and locations. We talked a little bit about it before. Change is a very scary event for a business consumer. And once change occurs, it impacts a whole lot of things within an IT organization. We need to be able to minimize that. Keep in mind, we're always marching towards that goal to business being, or from IT being less of a cost center to more of a business enablement function. Right, so we need to prioritize. This does not have to be all your apples into one basket type of scenario. There are certain priorities that your organization has. For instance, frankly, I would take a look at help desk tickets. I'd examine your help desk tickets and take a look at what processes could be eliminated either through automation or service delivery. We've seen in some scenarios as high as 70% help desk reduction just by automating key things that end users should be able to frankly do themselves. That's huge. That would be a priority if I were building out this thing. Also, because I'm a business development guy and not a technical guy, as a business user, I would want to have access to be able to self-service certain things within my organization without having to call help desk to deal with it. Right? Consider the needs of the service first. The delivery should be context aware. Organizations claim to have bring your own device initiatives. Bring your own device is already happening whether or not you have an initiative or not. It's not a specific initiative more as it is a reaction to a very changing consumerization environment that's occurring today. I don't know how many organizations proactively 3 years ago thought that everyone would be running around with smartphones and iPads and things like that, but it's happening now, and you have to react to it. Right, so the delivery should be context aware. Frankly, you should not have to care whether or not they're using an iPad, an iPhone, an Android, a thin client, a desktop. You shouldn't have to care where they're located, whether they're Starbucks, at home, in the office. And frankly, you shouldn't have to care what time of day they're actually accessing this information, right? We want it to be context. We want to know who that user is. We want to know what they're using, when, where, and how, and to be able to adjust the scenarios accordingly. Whatever you're using should be technology and platform independent. And of course, the reason for this is obvious, is that you have a lot of technology in your environment today. Some of it speaks well together, other parts of it don't speak at all together. But today we're seeing lots of Citrix, we're seeing lots of VMware, we're seeing a lot of VDI initiatives, we're seeing a lot of different operating systems, we're seeing a lot of different server infrastructures, we're seeing a lot of different business continuity and disaster recovery scenarios. Right? You have a lot. whatever service-oriented architecture you're looking at should be able to accommodate a fairly complex infrastructure that has a lot going on. We also want to take into account, this, and this kind of goes back a little bit to the context. You have different users in different situations. It requires distinct groups of settings. So people in sales are going to need something different from people in finance, than people at the executive level, than people in IT itself, right? You have a lot of different roles in a lot of different groups with people doing a lot of different functions. We need to be, but people in the same groups are going to have a common set of applications for the most part. They're going to have a common set of services that they're going to want access to, right? So we got to take a look at being able to intelligently organize those groups, and you probably already have them today, already set up in AD or some other format to be able to enable that. And then personalization, right? Can we allow the end user to be able to start, doing some customization of their own without having IT feel the heat of change?
I think we're good. We're just going to move right along here. How do we turn it on?
You just flip the switch, right? It's that easy, right? So enable it. So what we're talking about is being able to ensure accurate and timely delivery of services. So keeping across this common theme of IT as a service. If you want to convert from being a cost center into more of a business center, right, where you potentially could have the chance to charge back your awesome services to the organization to help fund more awesome things, right? The things, what you're delivering has to be consistent, has to be accurate, has to be timely. So if I'm Jane and I want to have access to Firefox, and my normal mode is either bypassing IT completely and just doing it myself, which I may or may not be able to do depending on lockdown. And we talked about, well, if I do bypass IT, then once again, we have another unsupported application. A better way might be able to provide a service store where she's allowed to be able to access Firefox directly that you're delivering to her. And now you can track that application and you can deliver it in the way that you see fit. But either way, she gets it quick. She doesn't have to wait for approvals. So the installation's not enough either. So being able to automate certain key aspects in your environment, a lot of folks use SCCM, being able to just deliver applications down to a desktop is not necessarily enabling a IT as a service infrastructure. It's a part of it, but just installing a bunch of things isn't going to do the job. We need to consider the workflow of delivering the service. So just installing an infrastructure that supports IT as a service means nothing unless you have an intelligent workflow behind it. And so that's why we're really hammering home processes here. We're really hammering home that you have to discover what you have out there today. You have to figure out what kind of services you actually want to deliver. And then once you figure those things out, then we can start setting up an infrastructure to be able to enable this. And all this information you already have in your organization already. It's just thinking of it more of a business workflow flow than as a IT problem.
The only thing I want to add is that there's kind of 3 steps. One is going to be before you actually install whatever you're installing, or before you provide that service. So that's all the business stuff beforehand, approvals, all that kind of garbage. Obviously, you're going to deliver the service, whether it's installing an app, whether it's giving them access to something or whatever. The final part, and a lot of people miss this, is users get lost as soon as you give them something, right? You're going to hand off somebody whatever it might be, and they're going to go, okay, now what do I do with it? How do I use it? So it's always important to remember that last piece of giving the user some education, a little bit of feedback, a little bit of knowledge about how to use this new service. Maybe they might know it, maybe they won't.
Yep, and a key part of it is making it hopefully easy enough to be intuitive, but providing that support for as well. So when we talk about the enablement consideration, so today, you guys deliver service already. You may be doing it in a manual fashion, or you may be doing it in an automated fashion, but either way, you're delivering things today for the end user community to be productive. And those services can be a myriad of different things, but for the most part, There's really only two ways to do it, right? Manually or automated. Being able to consider the technical workflow or process. We want to know what goes behind the scenes. The end user doesn't have to know, how a clock works in terms of the gears and everything running together to, make for a smooth operation, but obviously IT does, right? So we have to look at not only the business workflow, but, the chain of events that occur when a service gets requested or a service gets pushed down to the business consumer. We want to be in a position to be able to reuse, what you've already automated. So if you're automating a lot of these tasks, tasks are repeatable. Tasks can be linked into repeatable jobs, which can be linked into repeatable runbooks. Right? We want to be able to reuse as much as possible within the organization to keep that efficiency going. Not only that, but also to keep the expertise that's already built into the automation process and to keep a consistency across the enterprise. We also want to consider how to pass values or attributes to and from your catalog. So, Mark, maybe you'd like to talk about that a little bit?
Sure. You have different things within your organization, different data stores. Basically what we're talking about here is being able to pass things from an HR system to a different user so that we can validate that user and make sure they're part of that HR system. How are we going to exchange information? We do have business workflows now that maybe you're doing it manually or whatever. How are we going to exchange information between different systems in order to get that workflow happening?
Thank you. Right, so this is kind of the biggie. Right, so the service catalog should automate the business workflow, which determines the availability of the service. So the service catalog is two parts. The service catalog is what the end user gets access to be able to take advantage of these services from IT, regardless of what they are, requesting an application, doing a password reset, all the things that you've determined that you want the end user to be able to have access to. Right, but it's got to automate the business workflow. So once we see that an employee needs to be onboarded, fairly quickly, it's going to be, within the service catalog for HR to be able to click a button, perhaps, and all the approval processes start a chain reaction within itself, with the end goal of automatically delivering those applications, desktops, or whatever services you want to the end user. Right? We keep using the term business workflow because that's really what this is. So an app store is only part of the challenge. It's only part of the solution. Right? Applications can't address all requirements. So it's a start. Being able to have an app store is great for scenarios where John might need to get Visio for 2 or 3 days to be able to view a Visio diagram, and then have it returned into the license pool. An app store is going to be great if somebody wants to download iTunes, if you give them the option to, or be able to download Firefox or any number of applications that they're going to need to get access to. Right? Those aren't services. You're delivering the service of giving them access to the applications, which can be automatically dropped down to their to their device. Right? But it's not a full-blown service enablement solution. So we like to think of terms of a service store, right, which go above and beyond just an application store. It's actually delivering a whole host of services, frankly, that you're probably already doing today in a manual fashion and in an intelligent way that enables the business requirements for the organization and allows the end user to be able to get easy access to the information, services, and self-help items that they need.
One other point I want to make is that the easiest way to start this is to start with yourselves. So your IT guys, build your own service catalog for your own services, and then start integrating some of the user stuff. You guys automatically build a lot of different things. You have some automated processes. Wouldn't it be nice if I could just hit a button and then that server would go get built, right? Hit a button and maybe it's going to go create that AD user. So look at yourselves first and say, what do I do day to day that's very repetitive, that I do all the time, that I don't like doing? that's a good candidate, and start with yourself, and then you'll get a better idea of what you need to implement for your users.
Yep. And probably create some repeatable processes in the
Exactly. Change
process.
control is another great data store. We talk about help desk tickets as kind of some good data for where we need to look. Change control is also a good one, things that are repeatable that we do over and over again, that has an outline process that we do all the time.
Yep. And so we talked a little bit about the application store challenges. I'll just bypass this real quick. Once again, an app store is exactly that. Provides access to the applications. It can lower service desk calls, obviously, if somebody wants to, be able to have access to an app. Typically speaking, they have to call the help desk and get access to it, right? Through, perhaps through an approval process or not, depending on what's set up. Mark, maybe you could talk a little bit to this.
Sure. Basically, we're looking at the workflow. We want to analyze the workflow and find out exactly what it's happening as far as the business goes. We want to find out who's going to be receiving the service. Again, this goes back to that context. Who is getting what, when, where. A user, I was working with a company the other day, and they're saying, okay, we have users that work from home. They log in or whatever, they use VPN or whatever to get into their desktop. It's a remote desktop. But we don't want them to access this, we don't want them to access that, we don't want them to access all this other information. How do we determine where they're logging in from? That's a good question. How do you do that? Some people are going to do port control, some people are going to do some kind of, based on logging in from XYZ, maybe it's a VPN connection they can detect. Making sure that we can find out who's getting that is very important, and determining what service levels to provide to those users based on where they're coming from, based on what they're using. Maybe I'm going to give different service levels on an iPad versus a full-fledged desktop. So there's different ways we want to look at this. You're also going to have different applications based on the way that they're approaching the data. Some people are going to access information on a web browser, right? You guys all know about Outlook and how Outlook all of a sudden you're going to be using the web browser component of it. Are you going to get the exact same data? Maybe, maybe not. Can I download as large attachments in the Outlook connector? Maybe, maybe not. So you want to kind of look at that and see what exactly you're doing as far as delivering that service. You guys have approval processes, I'm sure. So I have a Visio, I want to download it. It's going to be automatically downloaded to my app on my desktop. Great. It's going to install by itself. But wait a second, I forgot to get that manager's approval. So another part of this system is saying, okay, who is whose manager? How do I determine that? How do I set that up? That's going to be a component typically of Active Directory, maybe not, you don't know. But we can also reach out to other systems. So being able to integrate with that HR system and knowing whose manager needs to approve that process. That's all part of it. That's part of that workflow. Technical process is required to enable it. Install Visio, right? No problem. Well, what if there's a dependency on an update? What if there's a dependency on a file version being XYZ? You don't want to have an automated service, and then that automated service craps out halfway through with a run DLL error, right? You want to make sure that all the dependencies, everything is ready to go when they click that button, that the automated process can kick off. Part of that is going to be examining your systems and making sure everybody is the same, making sure that the systems are all the same image or the same flavor. VDI really helps that, but there's different ways to look at how my machines are going to be more or less the same. Part of that is making sure the technical stuff is in place before I kick off these processes. And then finally, the last part is the return value. I go ahead and I kick it off, great. Who knows if it ran or not? Who knows if it actually worked? Is it going to be a help desk call if it doesn't? Or is it going to return an error value saying, I ran into that run DLL error and it did not actually install? Is it going to return data back to us saying, I need to kick off another process after this process to actually fully install the package? Maybe I need to go and change some registry hacks in order to turn off some warning messages, error messages, and so on. So there's various things after the fact, the return data, which can be just as important as the actual kickoff of the service.
Yep. Thank you, Mark. And at a higher level too, right, when we're talking about returning the service, is that there may be some temporary access needs that an end user has, right? We use Visio as a good example. Visio is not needed by every man, woman, and child within the organization, but somebody might need it sometime, right? We don't want them to have permanent access to it. So we need a way to have a timeout policy, right? Where they access it, they download it, get to use it for X amount of time, and then have it automatically returned up into the service store.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So here's some examples of IT services that that are fairly common, right? Not just common through any specific vertical, but common for everyone. So we see a lot of employee onboarding, right? The ability to be able to provision and grant access to all necessary IT resources, more or less automatically, to the person that needs to get access to them. Of course, offboarding. When somebody is removed from the organization, we want to be able to deprovision those services, applications, and whatever else was delivered to them in a fairly consistent and quick manner. And actually, from an IT perspective, it's a lot easier to onboard somebody than it is to deprovision them.
Actually, this was a really nice one we set up, and it basically, employee left the company, it would grab their Exchange PST files and everything, archive them off. It would grab all their home share stuff, archive that off, compress them. It would close all the accounts. It would go and look for all the access they had to all the home drives and shares and everything else, turn those off. It would revert the images back so that we'd get rid of all their personalization data. We would archive their icons. So there's a lot of really cool stuff that you can do here to basically set up a service around that.
Yep, absolutely. It's very popular because it's such a time-consuming process, especially with the approvals.
Well, people don't do it too. I mean, people basically, they light up and they, delete from AD. Great, but you got all this other stuff out there you still got to clean up, so there's a lot more to it usually.
Deleting from AD is a process, I guess, right? One step. Right, being able to revoke and grant access based on a new role. So John or Jane might be in sales today, but they move to marketing, in which case they need a whole different set of applications and access to different resources from within IT. Be able to directly install applications with an optional approval process. So if somebody needs to get access to a large healthcare application or Visio or PowerPoint or anything else within the application store, right? Does it have to go through a management approval process before they get delivered that application? Is that something you want to have happen? Printer access. Being able to install the appropriate print drivers and map the printers based on that person's context. I guess we didn't come up with it because I see it in every other booth, but we subscribe to the concept of workspace. Right, a workspace is anywhere where you do work. Right, it could be Starbucks, it could be at your home, it could be at the airport. It doesn't matter. Wherever you do work becomes your workspace. And from a particularly from a printer perspective, we provide an intelligently aware scenario where printers just adapt. Yes. Collaboration, share access. Right. So be able to grant other people access to specific network shares. I think you encountered this scenario recently, did you? When they were looking for that?
Yeah, I mean, we get a lot of requests for different components, but a lot of people, they want access to XYZ, need to get approval from someone, and then automatically go and create that. As IT guys, typically there's someone actually clicking buttons to make this happen. You don't want to click buttons. That's the whole point of this, is we don't want to click buttons. So how do we automate things so we don't have to click buttons? The user clicks it, everything else happens magically.
Yep.